All right. Hey guys, I'm gonna cover chapter actually the second part of chapter 38, starting on page 676. I want to do something a little different, so just bear with me. I actually found some handouts that I've struggled with all day long to import into this PowerPoint, but I think it will be helpful. I'm hoping it works for us. So let's just play along and we'll get there. It's not going to be that long. It's not a lot of information, but it's very important that you do understand this. Okay, so we're going to be again starting on page 676 and the image intensifier, and it first talks about operates in a simple way, very similar to an X-ray tube. An X-ray tube is under the table, and if you remember Dr. Haynes mentioning this morning about portable C-arms, that they had an intensifier and then the X-ray tube, and it was so much safer to keep the tube always under the table to reduce patient exposure. It's the same process here. So you have to remember that the X-ray tube, there's an actual tube designated for fluoro, and it's located underneath the table. And the big, huge carriage that we pull over, like I talked about in the first part of this, about the introduction of the image intensifier from fluoro. So you have to keep in mind that the tube is under, and the carriage that we pull over the table is actually what we're going to be talking about today. It's a huge, big tower. We call it the fluoro tower, actually. But what I've done is I've found some schematics, and before I get into the actual chapter, I want to just go over it, and I hope this will help you understand it a little bit better. First of all, these are two images found in your book. It's on page 677. Looks very similar to an X-ray tube when you're looking at it. This is actually looking at it from the bottom. This is the input. This is the front of it. Okay, this is what you call the input phosphor. Look how huge it is. This is made out of a certain type of chemical. It's called, remember we talked about phosphorescence, fluorescent. It's got a material coated over it, but I'm not going to get into that quite yet. I just want you to appreciate the fact that this has got a huge input lens, and then we have a very small output. So the idea behind this is called image intensifying tube. We're trying to intensify that very dim image that we talked about with the development of fluoroscopy. Remember the radiologist staring directly into the beam, looking at this very faint green-looking fluorescent image. We're trying to intensify that. So what we're going to be doing, we're going to be taking the signal, which is this entire circle here, coming out of your patient, the remnant beam, will hit this, and that energy is going to be pushed all the way through from down here. This is upside down now. All the way through, and it's going to be forced to come out of this very small. Usually the output phosphor is usually 1 inch, and these can be as large as like 40 inches or something like that. They're huge. So that's why we have such a huge big tower that we're pulling over. But anyway, I wanted you to be able to appreciate what we're doing here. We're going to be our x-rays are going to be a remnant beam. It's going to be hitting this, going through several different layers, and that's what this little presentation, this video is going to be about. Coming out of this small diameter output. So just think about it. We're focusing something really large down into something very small. So what does that sound like? It sounds very similar to the X-ray tube, because we're taking those X-rays, we're slamming them across. This has a photocathode and an anode in it. We'll talk about those components in just a few minutes, but it's very similar to an X-ray tube, but it's got a few extra steps involved. So this is the schematic that I thought would really help, and I hope it brings it to light for you before we get into all the specifics of the chapter. So we're going to take the schematic, and we're using one X-ray. One X-ray came out of your patient. It's at 50 kilovolts, kilo electron volts, a photon. That's an X-ray, okay? It's coming out of your patient. That's your remnant beam. You have one. That one X-ray is going to first hit the fluorescent screen right here. It's painted on phosphorescent material, cesium iodide. We'll get to all that in a minute. So that one photon goes through the fluorescent screen, and it now turns into 2,000 light photons. So we went from one X-ray to 2,000 light photons, okay? And we're right in between here, these two lines, the dotted line and the black line. That's where this happens at, right here where your fluorescent screen is. The front of this is called your fluorescent screen, and on the very back of it, it's actually antimony and cesium. It's painted on the very back of the fluorescent screen. So as the light photons come through the photocathode, it's going to take a lot of light photons, and it's going to release 100 photoelectrons. Here's electrons now. So we went from an X-ray to light photons. Now we're down to just 100. So it took a lot. It took over 20 light photons to eject 100 electrons. Okay, so we're right here now. The X-rays, the electrons are coming through just like in the X-ray tube. They were started out as a remnant X-ray, went through fluorescent material, it glowed, so it emitted light. That one X-ray of 50 kilo electron volts created 2,000 light photons right between these two layers. Those light photons reacted on the photocathode. We'll get to all that in a minute. And now it's releasing photoelectrons or electrons. Now our job, or the tube's job, is to actually start focusing these electrons as we get all the way to, look what we have now. We have another what? Anode. So you're going from a photocathode to an anode. Sounds very familiar to what? An X-ray tube. But the idea behind it is we're going to convert this one X-ray, okay, this one X-ray into, look what we're going to end up with, 2,000 light photons. That's the brightness gain. We're taking one X-ray. This is a schematic. This is a hypothetical. This is a watered down version for you to understand. 150 kilo electron photon goes through the fluorescent screen. It glows. It emits 2,000 light photons. The light photons hit the back of the fluorescent screen, which is coated, and it's called a photocathode. It's got a chemical on it. It responds to the 2,000 light photons. It releases electrons, 100. These electrons are funneled down kind of into the bottleneck. You see it up here. That's your anode right there. These little lines right here are called electrostatic lenses. They have a charge on them, guys. So this charge is pushing your electrons, funneling down to where they're going to enter into the anode. Your anode has a huge, huge charge on it. So all of this is being designed to pull these electrons and focus them down into this tiny little area right here. And now they're going to go through the output fluorescent. It's fluorescent also. You had electrons, 100 electrons goes through this tiny, tiny little output. But what they've picked up is kinetic energy. These things, I think I will get into like 5 to 10,000 or something like that. But up here, you got like 25,000 volts applied to the anode. So there's a huge pull for these electrons. So they're picking up the speed, just like in your X-ray tube. So that speed is going to allow them to, when they interact with this fluorescent screen, they have so much more we've got 100 electrons, but they got substantial kinetic energy. So they are going to respond to this tiny 1-inch diameter fluorescent screen, and they're going to emit 200,000 light photons. One X-ray created 200,000 light photons. That is your brightness gain. That's how much more brightness we have, and we'll talk about that in your book. I hope this helps out as I introduce the actual. Now we're going to talk about each one of these layers. We're going to talk about the fluorescent screen. We're going to talk about the photocathode. We're going to talk about the electron stream, which is there right here, talking about the electrostatic lenses, the glass envelope, very similar to an X-ray tube, your anode, and we're going to talk about the output fluorescent screen. Okay, I just thought this starting out with a schematic may help you understand what we're doing. We're intensifying that one X-ray into 200,000 light photons. That's the brightness. That's how much more brighter we're getting an image, and this is how. And keep in mind, there's billions of X-rays. This is just hypothetical numbers, but I think it speaks volumes for you when you're trying to learn what happens in each level of this image intensifying tube. This is what it's called, image intensifying tube. Okay, that's it again. It's a little distorted, so I just left it in there. It took me forever to get these images in there. I had to take them off my phone. Okay, here's another picture of it. It may work for you. Again, I'm putting all these schematics in here just to help you out. This is your input phosphor, cesium iodine, X-rays coming in. They're right between this layer. You're getting what? Light. Your light's going to be emitted here. The light interacts with the photocathode. Electrons. Here's your electrostatic lenses. The electrons are being condensed tighter and tighter. This is the anode. They go through the output phosphor, and you have light photons. Gives you a little explanation over there. It says, since the electrons are generally accelerated by the high kVp, sounds familiar, right? There is an approximate 50-fold increase in the light emitted at the output screen compared to the input screen. Here's your input to output. This results in a much brighter image. Okay, that's a review. You can read that. That just basically goes over that first slide that I shared with you, just in words. I thought it would be helpful. Okay, so the image intensifier itself is converts the remnant radiation beam into an amplified light image. We talked about that. Now that those lights that's coming out, that's 200,000. Those have to be collected, and we'll talk about that at the end. And that's where this little video will stop. It's in a large evacuated glass envelope or a vacuum tube. It's containing 5 electronic components. Available in diameters are 15, 23, 30, or 40 centimeters, 6, 9, 12, or 16 inches at the input phosphor. This is your input phosphor. Remember, it's the big one. Input. That's collecting your remnant X-rays. Okay, here's the same pictures I stole from this one and put it in the front actually. Increasing the physical diameter of the input phosphor results in increased image resolution, since a larger number of pixels are focused onto the same output size. The same output size, this is always going to be 1 inch, but they're talking about since there's a variation in the size of the input phosphor that you can get, it's saying that the input phosphor, since the larger one, will be able to collect more, so it's going to have better image resolution. Okay, it says forcing the output pixel size to be reduced. Okay, so that's exactly what it does. It pushes them all in, making the pixel size get much smaller because all of them are being projected out of this tiny one, but they're the same number. So keep that in mind, that's why you're getting better resolution. You get the larger the input, the better the resolution on the end. Sorry about this. Thought I turned it off. Okay, so here's another picture, another schematic. It says the input phosphor. We're talking about right here, this first black line. It's a layer of fluorescent crystals called cesium iodide. It absorbs X-rays and re-emit the energy as yellow-green light. Remember the lights that came, the 100,000, or was it 1,000? I can't remember. But we had that one incident X-ray. And now it's converting that to light. So that's what happens with your fluorescent layer. Your input phosphor converts the energy of the X-ray into a yellow-green light. That light is going to hit your photocathode. The one thing unique about cesium iodine, when they actually grow it, they call it grow it on this front here, on this glass. It's kind of like they're spraying it on. As it collects, it forms needles. So it's like a bunch of needles sticking straight up and down with a hole in them. Well, what that allows is, as it's creating and responding to the X-rays energy, and it's glowing, the light is maintaining that funnel. So that's helping you keep your resolution. It's preventing it from dispersing because the crystals themselves are very perpendicular, very like a bunch of needles just sticking straight up and down. So as your light is being emitted, they're being projected through the pipes. And that's what they're talking about, needle shape, which prevents lateral dispersion of light. Remember, light has a tendency to want to spread. Okay, the photocathode, a thin photoemissive material, metal layer, made of a combination of antimony and cesium components. Upon absorbing the light energy, remember the light energy is coming from the fluorescent screen, that's the input phosphor. It emits electrons. Thus, a beam of millions of electrons is produced, millions of electrons. But remember, it took a lot of your light photons to emit those electrons, to release those electrons from the photocathode side. These are actually all that big glass dome I showed you. This is the front and the back of it, if you want to think of that, because it's actually layered together. Okay, the electrostatic focusing lenses. That's these little lines right here, right there, and this here is your anode. A series of positively charged metal rings that become narrow towards the anode end of the tube. Notice they're getting more narrow. Stronger positive charge on each narrowing ring focuses the electron beam onto the output phosphor. So these have a positive charge. They're focusing the electrons, getting them closer and tighter to go through this bottleneck of the anode. A stronger positive charge on each narrow ring focuses the electron beam onto the output phosphor. The output phosphor is right here. Concentrating the electrons increases output intensity by forcing them down, and also you're causing them to have that kinetic energy, right? Okay, this process is called minification. Okay, it says concentrating the electrons increases output intensity. Minification occurs because we have such a large input to such a small output, but they're the same number of electrons, but they're pushed down tighter and tighter as we get closer and closer to, and we'll talk about the anode in just a minute. But then look how tight they are right there. So that is called, the process is called minification. The accelerating anode. It's a small ring of metal right there. It's a cutout, but we can see it's right there. In the neck of the tube with 25,000 to 30,000 volts of positive charge applied to it. That's a lot of voltage, resulting in acceleration of electron imparts 50 to 75 times the kinetic energy they start with. 50 to 75 times. That's where your brightness gain's coming from. These electrons are picking up so much kinetic energy when they actually hit the back of this fluorescent screen, this output screen. It's just going to burst a ton of light. This gain in flow or flux gain also increases output intensity. The gain, it says this gain in flow, they're talking about as it accelerates. The faster it's getting, that is the flow, or it's called flux gain, also increases output intensity because of the greater kinetic energy. You're getting a greater output at the output screen. Okay, the output phosphor, there's that little same picture again, and there's that little 1-inch diameter. It's made out of cesium iodide also. Same element, same chemical that your input phosphor down here was made out of, so it's a fluorescent. It's going to respond to the kinetic energy of the electrons, converts the kinetic energy of the electrons, striking it into light. This light image is then picked up by a CCD or a CMOS camera. So in other words, after the light has been created, we have to do something with the light because the light is actually the image. So we have to have a charge coupler device or a complementary oxide sulfate, I believe is what that's, if I'm thinking right. But these are cameras that's going to detect that light, but we're going to stop there because we need to focus on these layers of what's happening within the image intensifier. And I'll do another short video and we'll talk about what happens with this huge amount of light that we've created here. It's a huge amount of light responding from that kinetic energy going through this output phosphor. And that was it, guys. Let me go back. I'm going to do that quick review for you right here. Let me I'll just read it to you here. It says, let's review the tube now, making sure everyone understands the parts and what occurs with each one of them. X-ray photons, remember the one, strike the input phosphor cesium iodide, needle-like structures, and are converted into visible light photons. These light photons then interact with the photocathode. Photocathode receives the photons. Photons are white light. We've had an X-ray. We're going to white light. Now we're going to electrons through the photocathode, which is directly behind the input phosphor. Upon stimulation, the photocathode produces electrons called photoemission. The electron stream must be precisely controlled to fall on the output phosphor, that 1 little inch circle. This is done by the electrostatic lenses, keeping everything focused, so they're getting tighter and tighter and tighter, but they're all still aimed at that 1 inch output phosphor, passing through the anode hole and finally arriving at the output phosphor where the photoelectrons are converted back to visible light, but by a 50 to 75 times fold. Looking at the picture of the one X-ray photon after interacting with the input phosphor created 2,000 light photons, which after interaction with the photocathode produces 100 photoelectrons. So it took a lot of white light, because think about the energy of white light, very weak. So it takes a lot of them, but we get 100 of photoelectrons. Now we're going to start giving it some kinetic energy, lots of positive charge being applied. Then you have this at the neck of it, you got the anode accelerating ring, and it's got 25,000 volts tied to it, pulling those electrons up. Okay, it says, which have been focused and traveling across the tube with great energy, finally going through the anode and interacting with the output phosphor, creating 200,000 light photons. That is your image brightness gain. We went from one X-ray of 50 kiloelectron volts to over 200,000 light photons. We'll talk about brightness gain, which is a very short section in your book. And I hope I didn't run through that too fast for you guys. It's pretty self-explanatory. I thought the schematic and me going through those few slides would really help you out. I'm going ahead and let's see, close this out. And we close the last share, so application share was ended. Okay, guys. If y'all have any questions, please shoot me an email, or I'll be presenting this information Thursday. So I really hope you take the time to watch it, try to understand it. I'll be talking the same thing, just live. And if you have any questions, that would be the time to talk about it. But I will be making one more short video talking about the brightness gain. Okay. All right. Thanks, guys.